Welcome. My name is Michael Wickerson, and I am putting together this brief introduction to myself and where I've come from, where I see myself going. And I'll just start by saying that I'm Canadian born. I moved here in 2001, took a position at the Kansas City Art Institute, and served as chair in that program. I think I'm on to my 13th or 14th year having to serve as acting chair, full chair, and interim chair again this year. But when I moved here, I lived in the city, and this is where I currently reside, up at Lake Wyandotte in Kansas City, Kansas, within the 435 loop. That wasn't where I got my start. I kind of went a little stir crazy, I guess, in the city, and in 2007, I started running down to Truman Lake, a place called Seven Rivers, and within 9 days and a chainsaw and a backhoe, I built myself this little shack for me and my wife, Beth Allison Wickerson. And I stayed there for, I don't know, a few seasons, on and off in the weekends. There's a nice Monel nickel-casted door on here that I did at the Kansas City Art Institute, and there's also a nickel-plated disc up on top of the bullhorn structure. This is where I moved in after several years of kind of married life and teaching and administrative responsibilities at the Art Institute. And this is what it looked like when I moved in about 2010. I had quickly altered that space, and this was a photo shoot within a few years tied to the Fire Over Kansas series. And this was a kind of backdrop theater of shapes full of kilns, foundries, furnaces, and everything. And this series was called Fire Over Kansas. Since then, I've built other structures and built usually working in Adobe, found earth, shovel, everything done by hand for the most part, chainsaw, wheelbarrow. And this is kind of what the backyard has taken shape. Off to the right, there actually is a foundry there, which is called the Grieve Foundry, and a building's gone up and come down, but the furnaces and gantry resides. I did start the Wickerson Studio Foundry when I had two of my kids, Oscar and Max Wickerson. So in 2015, I started producing castings, and I also built from the Onagamet kiln I decided to build a Bury kiln so I could do a lot of ceramic firing out here on the land. The furnaces that once were at Kansas City, and I did a lot of bronze casting there, aluminum casting, nickel casting, iron casting. I've since downsized those furnaces to be much more efficient and tied to 3D printing possibilities, and I took those old furnaces back to my land when we had to renovate and build the Fab Lab. And here's me casting a pretty large plate. I think this is a test piece for one of the panels at the Argentine Library. Before that, this is the wall to the old sculpture South Pad. I had done a lot of testing in aluminum, and I was adding oils, waters, basically just using some simple Sumerian cuneiform text imagery to inspire some large plate panels and kind of pushing the full extent of what one single person could do in the foundry. I did a nice wall installation for Scott Francis House of the Sun, and these were to mimic nickel casts of the same iterations. I think there was 13 panels or 9 full panels, 10 maybe, and then there were some accessorized panels outside the house, and that was installed while the house was being remodeled. I did a series of 9-panel plates for the Argentine Library in Kansas, pretty large scale, not outrageous in scale, but probably 2 by 4 feet panels for maybe a little shy, 20 inches by maybe 4 feet. For the Argentine Kansas Library, which are nickel bronze cast. I've done a lot of work for the Azaner Company. I've done a lot of renovation in Kansas City. I have little castings tucked all over the place, including the flame that's on the Paseo Street sign. If you ever go by that, you look at that little traditional zinc cast flame. That's actually an aluminum cast done out at Wickerson Studios, modeled by me and my oldest son. Done some work, made some molds, didn't carry, I think this process didn't actually go into bronze, but you recognize some of this imagery around Kansas City. I certainly had 2 kids at the time, and I've always pushed Wickerson Studios to facilitating the education of my own kids, and even though it traditionally stems from bronze casting and analog working by hand, that's moved very digital very quickly. Here's a collection of a series of prints that went to Fire Over Kansas on the Casey Studio magazine in 2014. I made the cover. And there's the cover with the big bub kiss coming in second place. We've had a good film festival tied to this, and there is another documentary that I'm going to attach to this in case you guys want to see Fisher of Men and what came from that. Here are the images. This is an Adobe built structure called Hamlet Mill in my backyard, and I'm tucked up there holding a cow skull. This was the Wickerson Ranch. I think this was kind of playing off of some art history. You have to look into it. Matilda, a little surrealist take on my neighbor's donkey, and burning of one of my sculptures, a cupola cart wagon. And then I've done tons of video series with other artists and photographers that want to come out and use my animals and backdrop for whatever they choose to do. This was one of my last sculptures I made at Kansas City Art Institute. It's now a parking lot where I was residing and building this with a gantry, but this was the scale and models and what I was very interested in. Wheels being cast, bells being cast, and there's Oscar born and my wife moving into the land, one of the first things we set up in the winter of 2009. Since then, it's been a place of rest and respite. Other artists have come out, built pieces. Buildings go up, buildings come down, things get on fire, grass gets cut. One thing I've learned is the only thing that's lasting is earth, and with grass upon it. Everything else kind of decays and falls down. Here's the Onigama kiln with the backdrop in the snow. A little too much fuel necessary to fire that thing off. I've since cannibalized it and built another furnace. And then here's the tower and some residues of the old Kansas City Art Institute pieces that you can't send to the scrapyard because they're obviously have parts and pieces that can't be scrapped. This was an end project that I started to build. This Fisher of Men tower. I had a lot of people out to my land in 2014, but it still was a very analog process, a traditional process. Get your hands dirty, get out in the woods, and build. And here's a recent photo shoot, and this actually isn't a shot. This is just a process shot of when we were staging it. And that's my oldest son, Oscar. I produced. This is actually had to make smoke for a photo shoot. I found that cow manure next to it. It made the thickest soup possible. That with a blower, and there you go. You can really have some fun and exercise what you want to do out here in Kansas. Here's some iron bores. This is what I was running out to the middle of nowhere and having my first iron pour with charcoal, cut treat. Actually, not even charcoal, just cut hardwood and tapping iron out of it. Here's the process of getting that tap. Pretty messy process. It's certainly not the most efficient, and since then I use much more efficient coal and processed coal on my land. Here's a pour traveling around. Did a lot of international events. This is in Suffolk, England for the US-UK Iron Conference. And then I produced tons of castings from investment casts, old. I obsess about this kind of cupola wagon. It's it's kind of that thing that's in my mind that I can't get rid of. A lot of these bell wagons, this is an iron cast. I do a lot of feathers on my land. I do a lot of life casts from sand molds, fine, and these are feathers that are found. Excuse me. Leaves, Canada. I've sent a lot of maple leaves back up to Canada and found a lot of wonderful techniques for finishing the details in them. All sand molds cast at Wickerson Studios. Another feather. There's an interesting process of thickening them, but it's something I'm really excited about. Nest that was found but then formed the nest underneath by a bone series of animal bones. I've cast every mushroom and anything I find on my land, from arrowheads to snail shells. I've transferred old bull's heads and played with aluminums and alloying them with metals, or just pairing the piece with another piece. This was a process I did for a company that was looking at Stephen Hall's work and getting a 3D model and then having to translate that through a 3D print and then putting that off into zinc. Here's the aluminum plate, the bronze plate that went to Argentine, Kansas, another one, pretty much cast from life, just draftable forms. The installation of this canopy had to go back on. All the castings, I think there was 197 rosettes and casting parts that had to be replaced in aluminum from the bronze. The process is pretty simple out at Wickerson Studios. It's sand molds from original objects or sometimes wax copies. My kids have been trained in that, basically working out of the garage on an 11-acre property. Cope and drag molds, top and bottom, and pouring in. Aluminum casts for the most part. This was the Rose Fountain in Manhattan, Kansas. This was a figure of my son that we did. We cast him from life, used gelatin, and made a very large mold of him with core. I do give degrees on my land. Not too many people. I think only 2 over the last 10 years. But it certifies that people made a substantial impact on the land and did something there. Here's the process of working at the Argentine Gallery with students, having the old foundry at KCAI. Very excited for that process, and that's here tucked kind of in between me, Wickerson Studios, and in town. The canopy had the same similar process of just pulling some Google images of that. I've worked on multiples, And I've cast everything you can imagine, from corn to avocados to artichokes to mushrooms to onions, anything you want. And I've made a few of these seats, and they've since patinaed very nicely on the land that commemorate kind of the Wickerson Foundry, starting with my sons, Oscar and Max, in 2015. Tested out some interesting processes, did a lot of work with the A's Intercompany and Metal Labs for a long time. And then those furnaces on my backyard, they pretty much run. Those are full pots of aluminum, 110 blower, dragged about 100 feet away from the house, 200 feet away from the house. And in a 3-hour period, I can do some pretty big green sand casts and resin sand casts. And here's us casting on dried out and baked concrete. That's a piece by Levi Walker. Like I said, kids are always out on the land, not since COVID, but we've made it these little workshops to try and bring that to the knowledge of kids. This was a critical point right here, and I know we're at the 10-minute mark, and I apologize for going longer than I said I would, but this print was being printed at an employee at in town. Took 14 hours to send this print. My first model that was scanned by my phone on Turnio or something like that, Sketchfab, put it together on the day that Ella, my youngest daughter, my youngest child, was being born, about the same hours of labor my wife was in. And when she popped out, this popped out. And there's Ella. So things really changed after this. And I went from the analog traditional process to starting to look at the digital. And my kids, obviously, I wanted to prepare them for the next generation, what was happening and what schools might be like. A lot of experimentation, moving from reality into the digital realm. One of our beautiful assignments by student Charlotte May and Joseph Canizales had a hand on this, but these are 5, pretty moderate size seed pieces that were printed in polycast resin, ceramic shell dipped, and then copied on each one. Very nice process. I was very happy with this series of 5. The digital goes back on my land to 2010, when I actually designed in SketchUp what I would do on my land before I built the buildings. And since then, I played a lot in very simple programs, Tinkercad, Tinkercoding, and scripting things. I'm going to try and speed this up a little bit. And I obsessed about this. And even though it came from a very childlike kind of program, AutoCAD program, the simplest version of what you can do with it, I slowly like to pull those into Grasshopper. And I learned in Rhino, Grasshopper parametric modeling, that I could do wonderful things, because I'm an old mathy and computer science person from the University of Waterloo that spent 20 years in visual arts. And I started to obsess again with the power of generating data, generating attributes for points, and then pulling surfaces from that. So from this kind of Tinkercad multiple parametric model, I was able to look at the objects and things that I've always made artwork and installations about in my life, but then started to find the essence of those and ended up learning how to script these. It continues with a lot of Grasshopper series. I produced I think 560 videos, but thousands of scripts on my GitHub. They're all made open source. The videos are open source to view, and I could see the connection to casting and glasswork. The mushroom I obsess about, I used to ruin morels and put them in the sand molds. What I realized was find the one you want and write a script that can distort and grow and change that. So I produce a lot of mushrooms from the same similar script. I then realized the power of coding and scripting. And going from 3D modeling into parametric modeling and design, I realized that Python was a useful tool, C was a useful tool, and all these processes that I used to do by hand, I started to think about robotics and what could be possible with that. Here's one of the last large pieces in my foundry last fall, 700-pound piece of this canopy of flexible fabric that goes over top of a chair. The furnace is behind it, the pot's in front of it. That was a monster to cast some aluminum into. Little nodes that I've done for other projects. The whole idea of robotics, and maybe not chainsawing my land, but having a robot do that, appeals to me. Obviously, the sense of what could we mill first and pull some drafts and make some objects with excites me as well. KUKAs and ABB robotics, I think, are in my future. My family's here. We are all highly digital minded. My wife's a developer at Signal Theory, and my kids are hard at work. We just sent the third one off to Pembroke this year. We're pretty excited with where they're going to go with their work. Did a little vanity CV search to see what comes up when I look at my resume. And I thought that was a nice little generation, icon generator from what's interesting to me. And then really Wickerson Studios is raised from the ground up to this digital framework. And it's moved from the modeling to the parametric to the computational, and it's moving into generative and optimization programs. This is the foundry I propose to make anywhere, and I can run single-handedly to pull out some beautiful castings and pieces. The process is everywhere from digital all the way down to pouring the slabs in a variety of materials, usually metal. I do realize that coding is the new second language to many, and since taking an online presence and redefining myself as a computational designer, I found an international connection to people that Yes, their first language is not English, but our second common language is coding. Here are some of the models that I've made from scripts and played with a little bit of rendering. Scratching the Surface is a site I've made. I've generated a lot through the GhPython and C# forums that I administer, and I pull off pieces that are much more iterative and parametric, let's say, and in the choices of what can be happen. And I'm driving these a lot by math. At that point, I threw in the towel, literally. Stopped casting, and this is one of my iridescent finishes. Waxed it, threw it on the ground, and said, okay, that'll be the last bronze casting until I have a reason to do it. And just recently, I finished a commission for a student that shows the simplicity and immediacy of making a SAML, pouring in bronze, doing a heat patina in it, and then just wire finishing the finish to it. So that's where I kind of am. I hope you find it interesting. I think there's a lot I can offer to people that want to use my skills. It's double the time I wanted to put into this. I apologize for that, and I'll leave another video up to show you the history of Wickerson Studios and what it's meant to me over the last 10 years, and I'm looking forward to the next 10 years and where my career leads me. Thanks very much for watching.